All right, so I think we're recording now. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Behind the Crime Scene Tape. I'm one of your hosts, Kevin Bicking from Bioclean, New Jersey, and today we have a really special guest. I'm really excited to have a conversation with him. Today's guest is someone whose name carries a lot of respect through the trauma and biohazard remediation industry. Don McNulty is one of the true pioneers of professional crime and trauma scene cleanup, founding Crime Scene Cleaners in Kansas City and helping shaping an industry that at the time barely existed. Over the years, he also played an important role in advancing professionalism and education through organizations like ABRA. Don has spent decades helping families through some of the most difficult moments of their lives while helping build standards that many of us still follow today. Don, it's an honor to have you on the show, and thank you so much for taking time on your day to join us.
Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor of mine as well. So I'm glad to be here. I'm always up for talking about this industry.
Awesome. I feel like there's not a lot of people that realize this industry that even exists. Which brings me to, I found a quote of yours on the internet. Your quote says, "The thought that this work even gets done anywhere by anyone only comes to mind once people realize the cold reality of life." I thought that perfectly described this profession because most people never really do think about crime scene cleanup or crime scenes like that.
No, even today, and the industry is out of its infancy. But even though we're out of the infancy, I still run into people very regularly on my travels through, because we cover the state of Missouri and Kansas. So I go out to do face-to-face with law enforcement and other organizations. And people tell me all the time, I never thought about anybody ever doing this work. And that's actually where that quote came from. Was I started writing a memoir that after many years turned into a book.
Nice.
But and I'm still working on it. But nonetheless, because of those type of quotes, that's how it came about.
That's cool. I like that. What when you got into the industry really didn't even exist. So I guess my next question for you is, how did you first even get into crime scene cleanup, and what made you think maybe this is something I want to do for a living?
Well, that was that was a process. So I've always had an entrepreneurial spirit. My first business was when I was 23. It was in manufacturing. It didn't last long. As a matter of fact, it died when it was 6 months old, but nobody told me that when you die, you're supposed to lay down. So I ran it for another couple of months and shut it down after 8 months. But that's when I got into the greatest part of my debt, trying to keep it alive. But aside from that, I spent years learning about business and management, and I was basically in engineering, and I was in a mostly R&D teams, research and development, because I'm an innovator. And the company that I was working for was Stevens Industries out in Lenexa, Kansas, and they made mail opening equipment at the time. And we had an envelope that they had been trying for years to figure out how to design a machine to open it. And the reason is because the envelope was packed with different size things that they were shipping out, or being shipped to them rather. And so I asked my chief engineer, I said, well, if I could figure out how to do this, what would you do? He said, well, number one, we'd make you a designer. And so that was an incentive for me.
For sure.
I was a draftsman and a technical illustrator. I also wrote instructions to go with my technical illustration. So anyway, I kept praying about it. And after about 2 weeks, I woke up with this idea stuck in my head. I got up at like 3 o'clock in the morning to sketch it out. And I left for work very early. I knew that people in the shop got there about 6 in the morning. So I arrived shortly after that and got in the building, and I started working on actually drawing out my sketch. Then when my chief engineer came in, I told him about it. He made me a designer and said, okay, now you need to build a prototype. And so I was had interactions with the plant manager and the assistant plant manager. And I thought, God, their job seems a lot more interesting than mine. So I purposed to do that. And a couple of years later, I became a plant manager. So, and I was second in charge of Watco Plastic, which most people have used Bob Watt's invention, even though he's gone and the patent has expired a long time ago. But if you've ever used what's in your bathtub, we made the plumbing for the bathtub. We made other plumbing products, but that was the main product. But it's the lift and turn plug or the push and pull plug in your tub.
Yeah. Yeah. I know exactly what.
And so that Bob Watts invented that.
Wow.
Then after 7 years, my job got so much that I wanted a little machine to help me. And he was in his 60s at the time. I was in my 30s. And I wanted this machine called an XT computer with Lotus 123 software. A lot of you younger guys won't know what Lotus 123 is, but it's basically an Excel spreadsheet.
Gotcha. I was about to say, it sounds like an early kind of computer program or something.
Yeah, that's what it was. But even though he had me do all this research and make a presentation, and I thought for sure he was going to buy it, he didn't. And so I got really kind of upset because
Sure.
when I quit, they replaced me with 3 people. So,
That
but
says
where I
something.
went was into hospital management.
Okay.
And my first job was housekeeping, and that's where I learned how to clean. And who I worked for was the very first service master, not the
Really?
service master we have today,
Uh-huh.
but the original service master. And they had a management arm. And so they would hire guys like me that had a lot of experience in management,
Yeah.
and they would even train us further. But then we would manage hospitals or universities or school districts, that type of thing. And we would use their employees and they would use our equipment and our chemicals. And because we had a process that they used. So that fit very well with my engineering background by having these processes in line.
Makes sense.
So fast forward to 1988, I got remarried in 87. And in 1988, I went full time into the part-time janitorial company that I had. I'd gotten a divorce, and I was also a bivocational pastor when I was at Watco. But then when I went to work for Service Master, I was traveling so much I couldn't handle the church work as well.
Yeah. It's a lot.
So it is. Yeah. I'd put 20 hours into every sermon. But back then when you got divorced, you can't be a pastor. You couldn't even be a deacon in the Southern Baptist
Really?
Church. Yeah.
I never realized.
Well, because it says you're supposed to be a man of one wife. Now they just say one wife at a time.
Gotcha.
I think it's kind of funny how that all changes.
How things
But
change.
yeah, so many pastors got a divorce. I think they were running out of pastors. So, um, but nonetheless, so I didn't have a ministry. And then 3 years later, I got remarried, and then but I had this little part-time company. And then I told my wife, I said that I've now been married to 39 years. I told her, I said, well, I always wanted to start another little business, and I'm thinking all the way back to 1973 when I had my other business in manufacturing.
I got
She said, well, we already have a business. Why don't we just expand it? And that
Yeah.
made too much sense. So we expanded it. We were wildly successful. And when you get successful in the janitor business back in those days, the internet was coming along, but it wasn't there yet. And the Yellow Pages was still your go-to if you were going to look up any type of company. So we would buy larger and larger Yellow Page ads. The larger my ad, the more calls I got.
That's interesting.
And so anyway, I would always turn them down, except for one guy.
You turned down biohazard phone calls?
Yeah,
Okay.
for help with suicide, homicide, unattended death, you name it. Everything that we would do today other than hoarding. I didn't get any hoarding calls, but I turned them down, told them I wasn't set up to do this work.
Yeah.
And this one guy called me very early in the morning. And normally I'm not even in my office on that day, but I was that day. And told him I don't do the work, getting ready to hang up, literally pulling the phone away from my ear when he said, but you have to help me. You have hospital experience. And so I put the phone back up into my ear and I said, well, what do you mean hospital? Have we met? Do you know me? And he said, no, but I talked to a competitor of yours and she told me that you had hospital experience and you could help me.
Wow.
And I said, well, that's true, but I'm just not set up, like I said. Well, he started crying. I'm lachrymose, which that's a big term that means given to tears. Like I used to tell my students when I taught this work all over North America, that I've seen the movie King Kong, I don't know, 30 times. I know what's going to happen at the end of the movie with that stupid monkey.
Yeah.
But if I'm in the room when
still gets you.
King Kong falls off the building,
Yeah.
I've got tears in my eyes and a lump in my throat. It's just something that
I
triggers it.
understand that. There's quite a few movies that get me like that.
Yeah, and certain music. You're a musician.
Yep.
Certain music hits me that way.
Me too. The chills, the tears. I
Yeah,
still get goosebumps.
absolutely.
Yep.
So anyway, through his tears, he was able to get out. Sir, you're the 12th person I've called.
Wow.
If you can't help me, who can?
Wow.
Well, I was, and I still am, the person that likes to have answers. Now I just learned that, well, if I don't have an answer now, I can get you one.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that back then. So I said, okay. I said, I'll tell you what. Let me call the last hospital where I was a director. And I had 5 different departments under me, but it was literally 2 miles down the street from my office. So I called my old director, Mr. Taloni, and I told him what was going on. And he said, Don, you come down and you get the suits, the gloves, the bio waste tubs, chemicals, anything you need, you come and get.
That's awesome.
And then when you get done, you put everything back in my waste stream and we'll call it good. And I said, well, how much are you going to charge me for that? And he said, I'm not going to charge you anything. We'll just count this as a community service.
That's amazing.
It was. So I called this guy back and I had already told him, which I didn't mention this before, but I already told him, I said, now, if I can get the equipment, I said, I know how to keep us safe. I know all about the bloodborne pathogen rule that actually came out in 1987, and this would be 1992.
Okay.
But I'm coming to help you. And I would never do that today because he knew this kid. It was a neighbor boy that moved in when he was 8 years old, and now the kid was 16 and committed suicide with his dad's shotgun in his own bedroom. But I didn't know how to handle what I was doing and felt that maybe 2 heads would be better than one.
For sure.
So we didn't do near the work that we do today. And as a matter of fact, if I walked in on what we didn't do today, but what we had accomplished back then, I'd be appalled. It was carpeted. We pulled the carpet and pad, but the floor was stained.
Yeah.
We did cut out the sections in the bed of the mattress, and we cleaned the walls and the ceiling the best we could. The ceiling was a smooth ceiling; it wasn't textured,
Not
so
a popcorn
that
ceiling.
that was a blessing because it took me a while to figure out how to do that.
Yeah.
And so anyway, when I got back to the office, I thought I'm never going to do this again. And so I started making phone calls. Didn't find anybody, and I mean, I found people who would do it part time, but not in my city. And then the next day I called St. Louis because back then St. Louis was twice as big as we were in Kansas City. So I called St. Louis and I called Chicago. Well, then I had to run and do bids and that type of thing for my business. So in between doing business and making phone calls, I made phone calls for about 3 weeks. And all of a sudden, I started to thinking maybe this might be a niche that nobody is doing that I can find on a dedicated way. I found people who did it part time. And even one guy, and this guy was out in California, and he kind of ticked me off because he said he would do it sometimes, but other times he wouldn't. And I'd say, well, sir, why wouldn't you do it all the time if you got a phone call for it?
Exactly.
And he said, well, it
Returning phone
depends
calls.
on how busy we are. It
Yeah.
depends on if I have an employee that has the stomach for it, which I thought that was a pretty good tell sign. But then he said, and then it depends how desperate they sound. That's the part that ticked me off. And I said,
That's such an insane thing to say.
I'm telling you. And I said, why does that make a difference? He said, well, they pay more if
Wow.
they're desperate. So I thanked him very much for his time and hung up. I was really upset over that
Yeah.
phone call.
I mean, that upset me, and I wasn't even the one on the phone.
Yeah.
Just hearing this story.
Well, the next day, I'm going to get a sip of water here.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Play a part, Marco Rubio.
I'm gonna grab a sip of water too, I think.
So the next day I called New York City, and one guy led me to call they called him a facilities director, but he was I guess he was in charge of the buildings and the stations and everything as well, but he was also in charge of the trains. The reason I'm saying that is by what he said to me, but they had a shooting in New York, and I did remember it being on the news, but a guy entered a car on the subway with a 9mm, and he started just shooting people.
Wow.
When he would run out of bullets, he'd drop the clip and put a new clip in, and he shot, I don't know, like 20 or so, 22 people in these two cars before they finally wrestled him down. So he told me, he said, when you get your business started, you let me know. Well, I hadn't made a decision to have a business, and I didn't tell him that I was having a business.
Yeah.
But that's what he said to me. And then he said, if you had a business like you're telling me, and you were back in Kansas City and I knew of you, he said, I would have flown you and your crew, your equipment, all up here to New York to handle those two cars.
I believe it.
And I said, well, why would you do that? And he said, well, I had 3 employees volunteer to do this work, and they've all been in counseling for the last 7 months. And so that type of counseling falls under workers' comp. I didn't know that's what he told me, and it does, but I didn't know that at the time.
Yeah.
And so a couple of days after that, I went home and I told my wife, I said, hey, I think I found a new niche in the cleaning industry that I haven't found anybody doing on a regular basis. And I said, I think it'd be great. We could have offices everywhere. It'd make us a fortune.
For sure.
And she says, my gosh, well, what are we going to be doing? And I didn't know quite how to tell her. So I just kept on with We could come up with a process to do it. And I'm talking about that. And she said, stop, wait a minute. I know you. And so what are we going to be doing? And so I looked at her and I said, well, we're going to be cleaning up after dead bodies. And she goes, oh, the hell you are. And so it took me about 4 or 5 months to talk her into it. But here's the rub. In between that time and the time I talked her into it, that's when my faith and my spirit, and I felt God speaking to me that this was going to be my ministry. That's why I sit here at 75 and I'm still involved. It's a ministry to me, and in a religious sense.
It really was fate too. You mentioned earlier that day that gentleman called you looking for help and needing help and saying that you were the 12th business that he tried reaching out to. As you said, you weren't even supposed to be there that early, but you were,
Right.
and you were able to take the phone call.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And I even tested it because there were a couple of times after we did get started that we just weren't getting work on a regular basis.
Yeah.
I mean, the other businesses, we started 3 other businesses, and all of those, of course, it was a whole different marketing model. And so um, it, uh, it, they just took off. Only one of those businesses in its lifetime had a couple of months where we didn't make a profit. The other 2 made a profit every day they existed.
Wow.
And so from job 1 on, I told my wife, I said, maybe we ought to shut down BioClean because that was the name of the company, BioCleaning Services of America.
Yeah.
And so she said, but if you don't do this work, then who's going to be doing it?
Yeah. Who else is there?
And of course, that's was the hook to get her on board, was that this was going to be our ministry. And so, at first, a lot of people start this for the money, but it doesn't take very long for the money to take a quick back seat.
Yeah.
And then it becomes about the people and who you're helping and why you're helping.
You said it becomes about the people. And another quote of yours that I found online that I think would be nice to end this episode on is, you said no one should be victimized twice. And that really sat with me. I'll let you explain what that meant to you.
Well, that came from a conversation with a lady whose son committed suicide.
Okay.
And I had come to check on my crew, and I was outside speaking to her, and she was, talking about how much we were helping her. And of course, you got that almost every job.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for helping us, and this and that and the other. And she made a comment. Now it's kind of escaping what she said, but then I looked at her and I said, really, the reason we do this is that no one should be victimized twice. And it just kind of came out. And so I did grab onto that. Later on, back at the office, I wrote it down because I had just read a book by Simon Sinek and he put out one. He spoke about this in his earlier books, but he actually put out a book called Your Why. Why do you do what you do? Well, he alluded to that in his earlier books, and that's what made me write it down, because I thought that's my why. That's what this lady had given me or sparked in my brain as to why we do what we do. And so that became our motto, our why. And then I believe in USPs, unique selling propositions, and that's what you really sell.
Yeah.
And so what we really sold was care, concern, peace of mind. And we only did the BioClean to get to that end. And a lot of my students have picked that kind of thing up. We brought that USP changed it a little bit over to crime scene cleaners. And of course, I brought my why, because
Yeah.
nobody seems to be able to verbalize their why. And so when I tried to get them to verbalize their why, they couldn't come up with anything. So I said, well, I have one.
I love that. We have to do this again. There's so much here that we didn't have a chance to get into. I have to figure out the technical things on my end and figure out how I can make this video to last longer. I want to thank you very much for your time here today. It's amazing to talk to you, and you're a very interesting person. You have so many layers to your personality. I've learned a lot today.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And yeah, I'd love to go ahead and, we discussed offline a lot more. But yeah, if you'll have me back, I'll be happy to, maybe we can make summaries of
Yeah.
the certain things.
Yeah, I'm gonna stay in touch with you offline. We're gonna get you back on, and we're gonna go through the rest of these.
Okay,
questions.
very good.
All
Well,
right.
nice being here with you, and I look forward to the future, and you have a wonderful week.
Thank you, sir. You as well.
Thanks. Bye.